Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to the Woo Curious podcast. Your map to the mystical, your key to the sacred, and your guide back home to yourself. I'm Eileen, a writer, a spiritual coach, energy healer, and slow living witch. This podcast is your invitation to explore a world where the mundane and the sacred intertwine. It's a haven for those ready to take the first steps into the realms of magic and mystery, providing a safe space for you to embark on your own enchanted journey towards healing and self-discovery. Here, I'll unveil the whispers of the mystical, the rituals often hidden in plain sight, and I'll engage in sacred conversation intended to stir your soul and lead you back into your power. I'm all about demystifying woo and witchcraft. So, whether you're a seasoned seeker or simply woo curious, I'm so delighted you've decided to join me on this journey. Let's make magic. Hey Woo crew, welcome to this special mini-sode. It's just going to be the first of a 4-part mini episode series. A little bit about my story. Before we drop into my story today, I want to make sure that I share with you about my upcoming free 5-day event. So once again, I am running Shine, a guided journey to step into your authenticity. It's running from June 16th to June 20th, every day at noon Mountain Standard Time, live, and as always, will be recorded because life. This is my second time running Shine, and I want to speak to the fact that, when we hear the word authenticity thrown around a lot lately, and so often we feel like, yeah, great, that's all fine and well to show up as my authentic self, be my authentic self, but for so many of us, knowing who our authentic selves are is tricky. Maybe you've looked in the mirror and felt like, you don't quite recognize the woman staring back at you. Not because of aging or stress, although those are very real, but because somewhere along the way you became a collage of roles and expectations. Wife, mother, daughter, caregiver, career woman, good girl. You've worn the masks, you've played the parts. And in the process, maybe you've lost touch a little bit or a lot bit with your you-ness, your truth, your wild, and your magic, the woman underneath it all. And if that feels even a little bit true for you, I would love to invite you to join me on this journey. Every day, we're going to be dropping into a little bit of teaching and learning, and then into guided visualization, which is, I'm just going to toot my own horn and say, my expertise. It's a soul-nourishing space to gently take off those masks, reconnect with the truth of who you are beneath the people-pleasing, beneath the perfectionism, beneath that external pressure. It's not about fixing yourself, it's about remembering yourself. Because when women begin to truly live from their authenticity, when we get to shine our light to the outside world, we give others permission to do the same. And that is world-changing. If you're feeling the pull, the link to sign up will be below in the show notes, or you can always reach out to me on Instagram at @IamEileenMarch to grab the link to join. Hope to see you there. I was in a business mastermind recently. We have what we call accelerator days, or what my coaches call accelerator days, once every 2 months. And part of the challenge that they posed to us, or part of the homework that they gave us, felt really resonant to me. I don't always run with the homework that I'm given. I am a little bit of my own mind about these things sometimes. But this one felt really important because I know that humans connect to each other through story. I know that storytelling, sharing about ourselves, is one of the most natural ways for humans to connect with each other, to feel a bond, to feel understood and seen. And so I am going to share Obviously not my entire life story, but a little bit of the story of how I ended up here, sitting, speaking to you, if you're watching this, holding my sweet kitty. She's not actually going to factor into the story too much, but she's here, so I had to acknowledge her. And in this line of work, in the business that I do. And this is going to be, as I said, a 4-part series. So this first part is called The Challenge. With many stories, especially compelling ones, we've got kind of 4 parts to the story. So we've got the challenge that is faced by the protagonist. We've got the turning point, that moment when things shift and the trajectory changes. And we've got the commitment, what the protagonist is committing themselves to. And then there's a transformation, right? The person that we are journeying with at the end of the story is very often not quite the same human that we started out with, because they've learned, they've grown. So this first part of this mini-series is the challenge. And when I thought about where to begin, I had to come back to my marriage. And many of you who've been with me for quite some time will have heard me allude to my marriage before. I've spoken about how I was deeply unhappy in that space, how it was literally burning me up from the inside. I was medicated for chronic heartburn. And I remember when I first started getting the heartburn, my mother said to me, "Oh, I only get heartburn when I'm stressed." And I looked at her and I was like, "Well, I'm not stressed. I'm fine. I feel fine." And the heartburn got more and more chronic. It started happening more frequently, for longer. It was always in the middle of the night. It was always waking me up out of a dead sleep, and I would pace the house, my chest in flames. I actually wrote a poem about it that I'll share with you at the end of this episode, because that feels delicious to share. And many of you will know that when I left my marriage finally, spoiler, I left. Here I am today, not married. But when I left, I ran out of that prescription medication that was helping me control the heartburn. I ran out of it a few days after I'd left, and to this day, I've only had heartburn flare up maybe 5 or 6 times. And Tums always does the trick, or Gaviscon does the trick. And so just the power of the mind. And I think this story, even though often when I tell the story, I talk about how wise the body is, I think it really speaks to the challenge that I faced, the denial that I was in of how deeply unhappy I was. And so this relationship was one that, it was the first one in my life where I felt like it had kind of staying power. I was old enough when we entered into the relationship. There was enough good about it. There was enough conversation about it. It felt in a lot of ways, even though I'd had a couple other semi-long-term relationships, it felt in a lot of ways like it was the first real relationship. The first one where I felt as though real relationship things were required of me. And when I say that, I mean like compromise. And I think this is where our socialization comes in huge, because I felt multiple times in that relationship like I had to sacrifice something I wanted, or my own happiness, to make the relationship work, to make him feel okay. And I think I really convoluted, and I still struggle with defining this sometimes. You know, that line between, yes, of course we have to compromise in our relationships, and sometimes we're going to have to not do a thing we'd want to do if we were single and we would just go do it because we have a responsibility to our partner. But we really have to be careful about how often we're doing that to ourselves and how often we're shrinking ourselves. And so this partnership, there's no other way to define it than controlling. It didn't start out super controlling. It got more and more so as we went along. And I really didn't know at that time in my life, I didn't know how to voice my needs. I don't think I knew what my needs were. I didn't know how to set healthy boundaries, especially within my romantic relationship. I think I was okay at setting boundaries outside of my romantic relationship a little bit. Not great, but better than within it. Still, that holds true very much. I'm much better at setting boundaries and speaking my needs outside of romantic relationships than in. I'm still healing from a lot of what I experienced during the 10 years of that relationship. I couldn't even ask for help with anything, right? Like I had really, really imbibed the persona of the good girl, right? When you hear me tell the story about how, I used to struggle to ask for a glass of water if I was sitting on the couch and my partner was in the kitchen getting themselves a glass of water, that was true, so true during that relationship, especially. I wouldn't ask him to get me a glass of water. I wouldn't do anything that might possibly perturb him. And I was constantly walking on eggshells because the reality is that this person was also very unstable emotionally and never aggressive, never like blow up violent. But if I said or did something that set him off, it would be like a thundercloud in the house for days, weeks. And as somebody who's always been very sensitive to the energy of a room, the mood of people, it was really, really hard to live there. And I stayed for a long time past when I became really unhappy. And here's why. The challenge for me was teasing out what was true and what I deserved, I think. I was always questioning, is this as good as it gets? What if this is just normal? That compromise to a really strong degree. So many people would tell me how lucky I was because he cooked. Now looking back, I was trying to come up with a list of all the other reasons they told me he was lucky. I think it's just that he cooked. He still cooks, to the best of my knowledge, really well. It's probably the only thing I miss about him. And when I did try to leave, so during the last couple of years of our relationship, it wasn't good. It was known between the two of us that I was unhappy. And anytime I worked up the courage to sit down and have a conversation that I was like, this one's going to end in me leaving, something he said would always pull me back in. I very specifically remember him saying to me, all I want is to build a family and be a good dad. And my heart broke. I felt wholly responsible for his happiness. And I couldn't imagine leaving. Who was I to take that dream away from him? There was also an underlying feeling that if I left, he might be a suicide risk. And when I did finally leave, he actually told me that if I had decided to leave a few years earlier, he very well may have been. So again, my intuition knew. But the challenge again is that I had been so conditioned by society to be a good girl that I was more concerned about hurting him than all the ways that I was hurting. I felt guilty for even thinking about leaving. Again, how could I rob him of that future that he wanted? Didn't I want that too? I felt so responsible for his happiness. And what this all boils down to is that, and I didn't have the language for it at this time, but I certainly do now, I didn't feel worthy of leaving. I didn't feel like my happiness was as important as his because I was a good girl and I could get through anything and it wasn't that bad. And shouldn't I feel lucky for having such a loving husband and a good life? I couldn't see beyond that. So for me, the biggest challenge at this point of my story was to recognize my self-worth, to decide that I was worthy of happiness and that his unhappiness did not trump that. Eventually, the pain of staying stuck, of staying in that relationship, overcame my fear of the unknown on the other side of it and my guilt for hurting him. And I left. And that, of course, is the turning point. And I'm going to share about what happened during that turning point, that period of time after I left him, in the next mini-sode. But one other thing I wanted to bring in here, because it's important for where I am now, you know, the slow living witch that you know me as, this woo curious, more than woo curious at this point, woman that you know me as. I had always been a very rational, scientific minded person. To some degree, I came into that relationship that way. And that relationship, certainly, especially in the early years, really solidified that for me. That sense of, you know, even when I was young, I always kind of said, well, when you die, you're dead and you turn into dirt and that's it. That's the end of things. And yet, there had always been a little bit of a curiosity, a little bit of fascination. You know, I always read the fantasy novels. I spoke to the trees. I looked for fairies in the forest. There was a part of me that always believed in magic and was always a bit curious about things like astrology. But in that relationship, even as I started to have some glimmers of curiosity for various reasons that are too long for a mini-sode, good grief, it's already over 10 minutes, but my husband, my now ex-husband, was a staunch atheist in the way that only Reformed Christian folks can be atheists. I think I usually get a few knowing chuckles when I say it that way. Basically that, you know, he went from being quite devout when he was young to being so anti anything that wasn't provable beyond any doubt with science. And so I was really forced to keep any curiosities about the something more that might be out there at bay. And this left me with part of that sense of like, what is the point of it all? Where is the meaning? And so that's important as we step into the turning point, the days and weeks and months after I finally decided to choose myself and leave. Okay, Woo Crew, I'm curious. Did you know this part of my story already? Is this new? Is anything resonating here? This is a tender subject, so I just want to say that you are so worthy of all the happiness you desire in this life, and I hope nobody ever takes that away from you. As always, please go ahead and like, subscribe, comment, rate, review, all those things. You know what to do. And I will see you back here tomorrow with another mini-sode about the turning point.